Hello, everyone. This is Mike Riemer from Pulse Secure, and today we'll be going over secure remote application access, specifically looking at accessing the DoD Office 365 implementation, the SaaS offering for DoD, without using Layer 3 tunneling. So in 2020, earlier this year, we had a cybersecurity insiders did a remote work from home security report. And the work from home as a whole has increased many security challenges that companies are looking at. So some of the top 4 security challenges that we're getting reported through the Cybersecurity Insiders report. First one was user awareness, and basically it's just users being aware of the solutions that they're using, the access that they have, and the information that they're processing, and not really being aware of the criticality or the sensitivity of some of the data that they're maybe pulling onto their own personal device or their home computer. Also, phishing and spam and type of phishing attacks that folks are looking at from a ransomware perspective has really increased as well. And so those threats and just people understanding that an email that they get that looks like it might be coming from IT asking them to reset their password actually may not be coming from IT. Also, just the security of their home and Wi-Fi. A lot of folks have default passwords or no passwords on their Wi-Fi, and allowed individuals to camp onto their network and then start monitoring communication of devices on the network going out to the internet. Also, use of risk at risk personal devices, so things that had ransomware or had malware on them, and people taking these personal devices and trying to connect them up to corporate networks, and then just gaining access to this sensitive data. And some of the initial work from homes, which we'll talk about earlier or later, that businesses just gave people carte blanche access in order to get access to the network and be able to connect up to the network. They didn't really put in granular type of policies restricting people at first. So these were some of the top challenges that came out. Other things also from an application perspective, which were the top risky applications, file sharing being the biggest one, where people had access to, or they were pulling files down and then they would share them over public forums like Dropbox or things of this nature, or just make the share like a Microsoft SharePoint share, and they would just make it public so anybody could get access to the information, and then they were posting sensitive data in those shares. Web-based applications would be the second largest exposed application. These applications, again, access to sensitive data behind the web app, and the app itself wasn't secured, so people were able to gain access to it through public proxies or public portals. And then video conferencing. And I think a lot of people heard of some of the initial challenges that Zoom had when we first came out and work from home, and a lot of the folks popping into video conferences that really didn't belong there. And potentially hearing or gaining access to information that was being shared during the Zoom meeting. 33% of businesses, recognize that they were ill prepared or not prepared at all. So 1/3 of all those that were interviewed basically said we weren't ready for a work from home shift. So they had to, put something in quickly and respond and react in a very quick fashion in order to keep their business moving forward. 69% of those interviewed still have strong security concerns about the implementation that they have in the work from home situation that they're in. And those work from home type of security challenges need to continue to be addressed. So when we look at compliant application access, and what does that mean, giving people access to an application in a compliant way, there is a specific set of requirements that have come out, as well as the challenges that can be addressed, or challenges that are there that come from some of the requirements. So the first one is BYOD. Not everybody had access to their corporate PC. They couldn't go to the office and pick it up and bring it, home. So they had to use devices that they had at home so they could gain access to the corporate network. And of course, with BYOD devices, you end up having those challenges of being able to identify that endpoint and make sure that endpoint met the corporate security requirements and doing those security checks on the endpoint. Authentication, authorization, making sure that not only are we authenticating people, but we're doing so in a way that we know what they're authorized to see on the network, so that we're not just giving them carte blanche access to the entire environment, but only to the applications or the data or the portion of the network they should have, or what we call least privileged access connectivity. With this, we can have things like multi-factor authentication, or we can have types of other granular level of application policies in place, so that when people do connect, that they only get to what they're supposed to. A lot of implementations, as we said in the previous slide, that were quickly implemented. So it was a L3 type of connectivity with the door wide open, so anybody could go anywhere on the network. They were connected, but not having that granular level of access is something that needs to be put in place, or folks are working to get those in place after the initial work from home rush. Making sure policies are consistent. When you have a global implementation of a solution and you have to manage that type of global implementation, a lot of times there's access is different. Somebody in the Americas may have different access than somebody in Europe or somebody in Asia. So this creates a dichotomy where you have to have multiple management type of implementation, multiple management solutions in order to handle it, and trying to get everything into a consistent fashion, consistent way. Huge requirement, making sure that you're consistent across all implementations. So having a centralized policy management, centralized policy deployment type of architecture or solution is really what we're looking for, and what customers are demanding basically in implementations. And then have the troubleshooting, especially for work from home users. How do you remotely troubleshoot any issues or problems they may have with application access? So we want to make sure that those types of requirements are bred into any type of solution. And then, to wrap up, let's make sure that we have a single sign-on for these users, so that we don't have to query them multiple times for credentials. Otherwise, we end up with credentials out of sync, and then we have another support issue for those users. So just as a whole, from a compliancy perspective, when we look at applications, these are some of the requirements and the challenges associated with them that we're trying to address. So when we look at a specific application, in this case, it's the remote access for Office 365 for the Department of Defense. Initially, this implementation was a full L3 tunnel application. So a client or an endpoint would have to be connected up to the Pulse Connect secure gateway located on-prem at a DoD facility. This allowed the client to connect up, establish an L3 connection to that gateway, get an IP address as a remote node on the network, and then all communication to the O365 implementation then hairpinned off of the DoD network and went up to the cloud. This was because of a security concern, security implementation of the DoD O365 implementation, where it only would take authentication authorizations from one of two IP addresses. So those two IP addresses all belong to the Department of Defense, and you could only log into the O365 implementation if you came from a DoD network. So in looking at making this more scalable and a better user experience, because hairpinning all that traffic over an L3 VPN tunnel made it very, very difficult to scale, and also gave a very slow user performance because of the amount of traffic coming over the VPN tunnel. And to move that traffic off the VPN tunnel and give a better user experience, we needed to come up with a better solution. Well, continuing to use the Pulse Connect secure gateway with Pulse client on the endpoint, we were able to move to a layer 4 application-based tunnel communication. And what we do here is we have the endpoint clients that now can directly access, quote unquote, going to the DoD Office 365 URL. And when they hit it, they get redirected to the Pulse Connect Secure gateway. So then gateway then collects the user information, does the endpoint posture assessment, does stateful endpoint security checks, and collects the user's credentials off the endpoint. And then we create a SAML assertion, and that trusted SAML session is then pushed into Office 365, authorizing the endpoint to gain access to it. So we meet all the security requirements that the DoD had in place, where authentication authorization comes from a trusted source behind one of the 2 IP addresses on the DoD network. But the traffic flow for the user, once authenticated, actually goes through a standard SSL tunnel between the L365 SaaS offering and the endpoint. Therefore, it's not hairpinning off the DoD network, and it's not being forced through the L3 VPN tunnel. Makes for a better user overall experience, better access for the user, and it also relieves a lot of stress on the DoD network, and specifically on the Pulse Connect Secure Gateway, allowing for better scalability of that solution for the different users and the number of users. Just from an ease of use perspective, here we have an on-demand, as it were, per application connectivity that's happening. We're still able to support the CAT card authentication on the endpoint, as well as having location awareness. So wherever the user is, we know where they are geographically. And when they come back and have internal network connectivity, we don't use the VPN tunnel. However, if they're external to the network, we do stand that application tunnel up and connect them up that way. We're able to support full third-party SAML IDP, and then also have our dynamic onboarding for the MDM solutions. So AirWatch, Mobile Iron, and Microsoft Intune for users that had BYOD devices. They could upload or onboard that device into one of those MDM solutions, and then through the MDM solution, we're able to validate security and posturing on the endpoint prior to giving access. So looking at the benefits overall of moving to this type of architecture and using the application-based tunneling instead of the L3 network tunneling, we end up with still having our endpoint compliance using stateful device checks and being able to ensure that the endpoint meets the security requirements before allowing access. Again, efficient high-performance network, as I said before. This gave us the traffic for O365 and Microsoft Teams was no longer going across the DoD network. There was no hairpinning going on. So a better overall user experience as the SaaS offering solution was coming straight off of the internet right to the endpoint over a secure SSL tunnel. Again, enabled BYOD devices so that we could go ahead and onboard those devices in one of the MDM solutions, and we could still protect those government apps and the data as keeping them separate in the MDM solution from any personal data on the BYOD device. We mitigated some of the L3 VPN tunnel security risks. Perhaps the endpoint may have had malware or had a Trojan sitting on it. And when you do an L3 connection, you're a remote node, so you have an IP address right on the network. This created a situation where potentially some security vulnerabilities on the endpoint could be released internal to the network by moving away from that model and moving directly to an L4. And this way we don't have a remote IP address, and therefore the communication can't be established. We're only allowing the specific applications in through and through from an authentication perspective. It streamlined the user's experience. Instead of having to log into the VPN gateway and establishing that tunnel, and then once there, go ahead and launching their Office 365 implementation and logging in there. Here, they just go straight to O365, log in, we garnish all the security on the back end and provide them a direct connectivity, and the user has no idea that this type of security is going on in the background. They just know that they have a better overall user experience. And again, we were able to complete the authentication using the standards that have been established for multi-factor authentication, CAT cards, as well as utilizing that SAML assertion for that single sign-on for the user. So in looking at the overall solution that we deployed, some of the things that for the DoD Office 365 implementation We also use these same basic parameters when we talk about software-defined perimeter. Now, software-defined perimeter and being able to do an SDP architecture will give direct device to application trusted connectivity. So this means that we allow that employee or contractor or third party that's doing the access, we give them the ability to go directly from that device right to the application that they want to get to. We're doing all the security in the background. We're validating the endpoint, validating the user, and making sure that they're accessing the appropriate application. But we do allow for that endpoint to go directly to the application for a better overall user experience. This type of solution can be done on both multi-cloud and on-premises applications for application access. So we don't really care where the application lives. We can continue to give this level of access and authorization. Users and devices are authenticated, are authorized, and then as always, we look at that endpoint and we do that stateful inspection of the endpoint to make sure that it meets our security policies and a geo lookup of the user and to make sure that they're coming from the right geographical location. And then once the user is connected, we do this continued adaptive and risk trust assessment, or CARTA. And this, we look at their connection and we continuously determine whether or not they're doing any type of malicious activity or if they have any type of anomalous behavior. Maybe they're trying to log in at 3 o'clock in the morning, which is abnormal for them, or they're trying to use a device that hasn't been authorized. Or they're coming from a geographical location that we normally don't see, or worse yet, trying to use an application against our data store that they haven't been authorized to use that application or that port protocol. All of this type of continuous monitoring of that user's connectivity we call CARTA, or Continuous Adaptive Risk and Trust Assessment. And we take that score and we apply that CARTA score to their access policy. So if you create an anomalous behavior or do a malicious activity, it'll raise your score. And once your score gets raised to a specific level, you would be denied access to an application. So over repetitive normal behavior, your score would come back down and you would regain access. So this way, it's a dynamic way of determining, does a user or should a user have continuous access to an application if their behavior changes. We also have the ability, based upon CARTA score, to implement a step up type of authentication. So if your CARTA score all of a sudden does jump up, we could give the option of doing a multi-factor authentication where you'd have to enter a token or something of that nature, or answer some security questions before you would get that elevated security connectivity back again. And again, Pulse Secure has had a long history with the Department of Defense, and from a company perspective, we're in 80% of the Fortune 500s. We have well over 24,000 enterprise customers, connecting up over 21 million endpoints and users on a daily basis to our solutions, giving them access to corporate resources. We have global offices all over the world and partners associated in those places. And we're closer to 800 employees now worldwide. And then 17 years of research and development on our product, and we continue to go strong with over 250 patents in the Pulse Secure name. Some of the security parameters or security certifications that we have with our solution, common criteria, FIPS certification, of course, as well as Comply to Connect, and then, of course, risk management and the others that are listed there. But on a daily basis, Pulse Secure solutions are used by all 4 major brands of the service, and we enable over 500,000 users to carry on their missions on a daily basis by utilizing the Pulse Secure solutions. So from our discussion today, some of the key takeaways that we have from a Pulse Secure perspective is Pulse Secure secures access to Office 365 and Microsoft Teams for the DoD network and for the DoD SaaS offering of O365. This allows any device at any location to connect up at any time, and we can validate those device, the location, the user, and make sure that based upon granular resources, they're only getting access to the information that they should gain access to. For BYOD devices, we allow for separation of government and personal information on those BYOD devices and maintaining that, as well as giving back to the DoD a high performance and efficient experience for the users by the implementation of the SAML assertion and authorization for L4 tunneling versus doing the L3, where we are hairpinning everything off of the internal gateways. We do this again for not just DoD employees, but also for contractors and all third parties associated, giving them that granular level of access, least privilege access to the information that they need to gain access to, and do this, like I said, on a daily basis for all devices in any location at any time. Thank you for your time and attention today. I appreciate your opportunity to speak with you. And if you have any questions, please reach out to your representative from PulseSecure. Have a great day.